Life is no thrill compared to nil. Life is no thrill, it's worse than nil. So draw the right conclusion, let them be still.
Welcome to episode number 91 of the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast, a podcast showcasing the wide range of perspectives and ideas throughout antinatalism as it exists today, through interviews with anti-natalist and non-antinatalist thinkers and creators of all kinds, now running 5 years strong. I'm your host, Amanda Sukenick, and returning to the show today is German antinatalist YouTuber and poet, formerly known as Clear Mind and now known as No Soul, No Toll, and the author of the book The Dubious Gift of Life, who today will be discussing his new English translation of Karl Ettinger's 1930 lost antinatalist masterpiece, No Country for Children. Simon Levin.
Why are some novels forgotten, while others are constantly celebrated anew? The answer is not always simple, but in the following case, it actually is. While dystopian stories such as Brave New World and 1984 provide us with boogeymen in the form of oppressive governments, No Country for Children is much more subtle, as it offers neither real villains nor heroes. It is therefore not surprising that this work has fallen into oblivion. Novels like 1984 are suitable for the masses primarily because they know how to agitate. Because the reader can look down on a villain from a morally elevated podium. But Karl Ettlinger, a German Jew, had a different idea when he was writing this masterpiece in the year 1930. In his work, the human condition takes up so much space that there is simply no room left for any boogeyman. Although this book is relatively short, it covers a wide range of topics, the most prevalent one being the question of procreation. Awakening from a 5,000-year slumber, the protagonist Dr. Young finds himself in a town being populated by a remnant of humanity that has freely committed itself to the commandment not to have any offspring. However, their leader has made this existence very comfortable for them. They don't have to do any work and yet experience a prosperity that defies all waste. Yet Dr. Young is by no means satisfied with a peaceful extinction and challenges the leader, who is not called Cassius for nothing. He brings out the strongest arguments for antinatalism, which even the incorrigible optimist Dr. Young acknowledges as the poison gas of logic. Let me read out some of the most iconic lines. If parental happiness provided goodness, how good mankind should have been. But parental happiness is a short-lived intoxication. What remains is a lifelong hangover, parental concern. And parental concern corrupts, humiliates, spoils, and, most of all, makes you unscrupulous. For who could not be frugal, who does not have to care for others? After all, man has only one stomach, a limited capacity for pleasure, and there is no room in his coffin for a safe. But he has children, whom he wants to see higher, richer, more powerful, and so he grabs and usurps. Turns to crooked ways, cherishes neighborly love, and neglects his love for humanity, all while bragging about his selflessness. You can't be neither father nor mother without betraying humanity for the individual. Only for the sake of children wars were waged. Only for the sake of offspring there was slavery. Greed, cruelty, all sin entered the world through the child. A child opened Pandora's box. Let that sink in. I don't want to give too much away at this point. In any case, I can recommend this work to anyone, even if they do not have any interest in antinatalism. Although the book is less than 200 pages long, it covers topics such as thoughts on suicide, nutrition, education, work, emancipation, prejudices, and many more, without seeming convoluted or taking away from the plot. This is apex literature. If you're interested, you can find the link to the book in the description.
Simon, welcome back to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast. It's an honor to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Hello, it's a pleasure for me. Thank you for having me again.
Yes, absolutely. Simon, this is a real treat, not only to get the chance to speak to you again, to have you on the show once again, but because you have truly given the antinatalist world an incredible gift through your work, through your efforts. You have found and translated a hitherto basically lost antinatalist classic, a novel originally published in the year 1930, if I'm not mistaken, by the name of To Kill a Stork, No Country for Children, although I know that there's some question as to the name. We'll get into that in a little bit. By Karl Ettlinger, if I'm not pronouncing his name incorrectly.
Karl Ettlinger, yeah.
Ettlinger, okay. A work that I have now read and thoroughly enjoyed, and which I absolutely cannot wait to speak to you about in detail today. Simon, this is not your first time on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. You were also my guest for episode number 48, and we talked at length about your YouTube channel, which was then called Clear Mind and is now called No Soul, No Toll. And we talked at length about your first book, The Dubious Gift of Life, available in English and German, as you can see. So I highly recommend people go pick those up. And so, but a bit of review for those that maybe have not seen that episode. And since much has changed since that time, may I ask, who is Simon Levin? And what have you been up to since the last time I saw you?
So thank you for this magnificent introduction. I really appreciate it. Well, I am just a normal antinatalist. I publish sometimes a book, sometimes two, and I'm currently studying. But, this is not the main thing here. The main thing is Karl Ettlinger's book we want to talk about. So I've been really busy translating it, and I still don't know if this is a good job that I've done, but I think it's still important because for me, this novel is something that really strikes a chord. And that is really beyond anything I've read so far, especially considering antinatalism. And I also recommend you to read this book, even if you don't have any interest in philosophy whatsoever. It has so much potential to entertain, but also has so much topics to cover. And it is something that you haven't read, I think. Even if you are well read, this is a book that is very different to what you're used to, I think.
Let me first off say that the English is beautiful and clear. I didn't find, I am not the best proofreader, I will say that, but I did not find one error. It is, let me just say before I say anything else, it is also available in German. I have the German edition here. Can't read it. Actually, I happen to say I like this cover more though. I will say that. But absolutely beautiful editions available on Amazon, very reasonably priced. I love antinatalist novels. It's kind of a separate, mini obsession of mine within the greater span of my antinatalist obsession. And I've read a lot of them, and I love a lot of them. I think they all add something unique to the conversation. This one is something really quite above and beyond. It's so ahead of its time. I mean, to read this book and to just think about the fact that it was published in 1930, so long before, the dawn of anything resembling contemporary antinatalism, came to be, is just shocking. It's incredible. So yeah, I cannot encourage people enough to make sure to pick up a copy and read it. I think you've done a wonderful job, not only in its translation, but just again in making it available for us. So thank you, Simon. Again, repeat from our last conversation, but could you possibly tell me why you are or not an antinatalist, Simon?
Well, I am an antinatalist for many reasons, and one of the most important ones is that there are so many dilemmas we are facing. For example, if you consider your life as a good life, you have also to consider what is the cost of this life. Even if you have a decent Western lifestyle, you're still living at the expense of others. For example, the third world, as you know, or the global south, you may call it, produces a lot of stuff we use on a daily basis. And yeah, this is a very unfair thing. And I don't know how you can fix this problem in the long run, because it is such a long history, going back to colonialism, going back to slavery. And these differences between the first world and the third world are still going on today. The best thing would be not to reproduce. This is the only way to really stop this. Otherwise, I don't know how to fix this. For example, people suggest that I go preach this to the third world, but as you know, if they don't reproduce, you don't have your cheap smartphones and your cheap food anymore. So your good life is a thing of the past. And you cannot selectively choose people, go reproduce, you don't, and we have the good life here. This is not how it works. And there are many such dilemmas. For example, if you go into pacifism, I am a pacifist myself. I consider it the best way to be in this world. But as you know, pacifism has a big flaw, a major flaw, namely that other people don't think that this is the best way to exist. And if you don't defend your country, well, you're gonna get wiped out. Basically, that's the point. And you can always say you can just leave, but you know, some people have to stay. Otherwise, And this is another dilemma. You cannot run away from it. You cannot really say, I'm a radical pacifist, I will stay my ground whatsoever. Staying the ground is pretty ironious. But you get what I'm heading towards. There are so many dilemmas that you cannot get rid of. And the third dilemma is, for example, free will. Many people think there is free will. I don't. And if you don't really believe in it, it's hard to have children, right? Because, you essentially force someone into existence who is not really a master of him or herself. We are all products of our environment, of our genes. And if you see it like that, it's hard to really choose to reproduce. Yeah. And I could go on all day, but we want to talk about the book, right?
There are a seemingly infinite number of reasons out there to not only not have children, but to be an anti-natalist. So your point taken there, but excellent points, and I certainly share all or most of them for sure. Let me ask, how do you define anti-natalism? I think this was a question that I did not ask you in the old episode. How do you think it should be defined?
Well, I think you did, but I'm always glad to say it again. For me, antinatalism is the art of compassion. If you really consider yourself a decent and moral human being, you should always go this way of not reproducing. It is the only reasonable and safe way to prevent suffering. There is no other, no better way, let's say. And yes, as long as you think that we should avoid suffering at all costs, this is the most serene kind of process you can go through. And this is a really easy one. People think that it's so difficult, you have to take so much care of contraceptives, but actually, come on. Come on.
You have undergone a bit of a change since the last time you were on the show. Your YouTube channel is different. Used to be Clear Mind, and now you are No Soul, No Toll, which I really like.
It's a rebranding.
It's a rebranding, yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Why have you rebranded yourself?
Clear Mind is a boring name. really don't know how I haven't thought of it earlier. No soul, not all. It is.
It's a good one.
It
No soul, no
rhymes.
toll is a good one.
It rhymes,
Yeah.
yeah. And this really comes into play with my my style, my poetic style. I have a lot of poems on my channel, so if the name rhymes, it's also a good hint towards that. And also, well, No Soul Not All really summarizes what antinatalism is all about. If you don't create a consciousness, there's no consciousness that has to pay any toll, that has to suffer, right? So it's better than Clear Mind. Clear Mind is like all over the place. Could be anything, right?
I liked Clear Mind. I admit I liked Clear Mind, but No Soul, No Toll. It's a damn good one. Takes the cake for sure. But yes, you are a poet, as I said earlier. Your book of antinatalist poetry is one of the very few books of antinatalist poetry. Actually, there certainly is a history of antinatalist poetry, but I mean, in modern times, there has not been terribly many books of antinatalist poetry. And it's a wonderful YouTube channel. And I'm so happy that, you know, along the way, you've had some lovely collaborations with other antinatalist poets, particularly existentialist Rose Petal. Actually, I'm not sure if that's what she's calling herself now. I interviewed her several years ago, actually, but not on this channel. She's awesome.
Uncertainly.
Uncertainly, that's right. That's right. Well, I on Instagram, she used to be Existential Rose Petal. So, may I ask, just how did you guys come together? Can you tell me a little bit about those works that you produced together?
Well, I wrote her on Instagram asking her whether she's interested in some collaboration, and she agreed. So yeah, I chose the poem. It was from Louis McNeese, Prayer Before Birth. And we did another one from Charles Bukowski, Born Into This. Two of the most prolific poems I've ever come across. So can really recommend this for anyone, to anyone. Like there are a couple of good interpretations of this poem on YouTube. Go look it up.
There's also a one-man band called Holotrop. I actually interviewed him for a written interview for the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. Should be available on the website. He also, in his album called Anti-natalist, I think it was called, does a version of that poem, and it's absolutely beautiful. You know, I know that you got a chance to meet Nimrod, the amazing Nimrod, and you got to be, I think, I know that you met him during the more recent German tour that he did. Did you also get to meet him during like the big European tour? But anyway, what was it like to meet Nimrod? And just also, if you could tell us a little bit about it. I mean, the German anti-natalist community, really, since last we spoke, has really popped off. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. Yeah.
Nimrod, first of all, is a very humble, very nice guy, very kind, and he has to be because he lives at other people's apartments. He's couch surfing basically, and so he did at my place for 3 days, and it was a nice experience for me. We met in Nuremberg as well, and had an outreach that was partly successful, partly not. But all in all, it was very interesting. Like we really had a good time there. There were also some kids and a mother posing in front of the signs. It was very weird.
The joys and tribulations of public antinatalist outreach. It's
Yeah.
the one time I did it. It was enjoyable. It's not really my thing. I mean, to be honest with you, but I have huge respect for anybody that does it. Nimrod is just an absolute like saint when it comes to that. I mean, his patience.
He even said, yeah, but he said he hates it. He actually hates doing outreaches, which was really surprising to me. Because he does it on a huge scale.
Yeah.
And he even pays a lot of money to do that. but he has a very strange work ethic, a very good one, I think. He does things that he doesn't like. He lives not a rich, not a wealthy life, but he has some intrinsic motivation that is so rare, I think. Not many people do things they hate, not getting any money, suffering,
he's a
basically.
really inspiring character, our Nimrod.
And yeah, we talked a lot about anti-natalist books at my home. We just philosophized a bit. I showed him my channel. Yeah, he liked it. And it was also for me a nice, yeah, a nice way of talking to someone who's from Israel, because I don't know many people from there, and told me about the situation there. And yeah, she's also doing a lot of anti-war demonstrations, outreaches in his hometown, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, an incredible activist. I'm glad you got to meet him. And yeah, it's just wonderful that so much cool antinatalist activity is starting to take place in Germany and other parts of the world. And in no small part to, Nimrod's intervention into parts of Europe and see what he could stir up there. So very cool. All right, well, let us finally get into the book. I want to start, if you don't mind, just talking about the man behind it all, Karl Ettlinger. He lived, as far as I know, between 1882 and 1939. I think those were the years of his life.
That's right.
There you go. Okay, so tell me about that book. What is this that you're holding in your hand right now?
This is the biography of Karl Ettlinger.
Okay.
Written by Sabine Hock. It's a very short biography, but it has a lot of images. It has a lot of photos of Karl Ettlinger. For example, there's one of Karl Ettlinger with his family. He had 6 siblings. He was one of 5 brothers and one sister.
Yeah.
In the middle is his mother. Yeah, so a big family, a big Jewish family, but not crazy Orthodox family or something, but it was a very German family, very assimilated. They belonged to the middle class, the upper middle class. Actually, they had an own factory. Quite a rich family, I would say, until, of course, the times of 1930s took a toll on his life, let's say that. Here's another photo of him and his wife and a dog. So really a good biography, really short and concise, to the point. Yeah, Karl Ettlinger was a prolific writer, actually. And what we have been reading is actually not his masterpiece, or it's not considered to be his masterpiece. It's just one of his works, which I don't share. I don't share this opinion. I don't know why the biographer considers other works to be better than his what I would say his main masterpiece. But it is what it is. I mean, who am I to judge? I'm not a literary expert.
Well, does this, if I may ask, does this author go into this work at all? Does she describe it?
No, it's just mentioned. There's a picture of his cover in the book. It appears there.
Right. Okay. That's the best that I've seen of the cover. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just mentioned, but other works are even cited. There are many paragraphs of other works which I consider very weak compared to his masterpiece. Have
you read his other works?
Some of his works I read. They are mainly comedic styles.
Yeah.
Style oriented, very you could say funny. I mean, the humor is of an older type, but I laughed a bit. Yeah, there were some funny parts, especially when he goes into the cliches and the stereotypes that other people ascribe to some nations. For example, I've read a story about an Indian guy living under colonialism under British colonialism. And, well, it's pretty funny. Ettlinger takes no sides. He is very ironious towards the Indian culture as well as to the British culture. He doesn't take any side. He's very open and very ironious. I would recommend this book if it was available in English, but it isn't. And I'm not going to translate it. Trust me.
That's okay. That's okay. No, but that's great. That's great to know that there is a biography of his life. I mean, so again, as you said before, very prolific guy. I mean, there is a Wikipedia page which I'll link to below. He wrote something like 40 some odd books, almost nearly 2,000 articles, just about.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly he had to have been well known in his time. Was he a beloved writer of his time, would you say? Was
Yes.
he always sort of on the outskirts? Yeah, okay. He was well
known. He was not famous like Thomas Mann.
Yeah.
Or other prolific writers during that time, but he was indeed an important figure in Frankfurt, his birth town. And he wrote especially during the First World War for the Reich, basically, for the Kaiserreich. And he was a staunch patriot. You wouldn't believe that if you've read the book, but actually he has a very long history of writing poems and later reports of his fatherland and the wars, and he was very productive. He even volunteered for as a soldier in the First World War, and was even more patriotic than many of his contemporaries. Unfortunately, he got severely wounded. His arm got crushed, so he had to give up on his musical inquiries. He was very musical, you could say. He had to then also get hospitalized, and later on he abandoned patriotism. But I don't know exactly why. You could think that it was the Second World War, that it was the Nazi Reich, Nazi regime. As a Jew, he suffered severely from the suppression. He even had to give up all his belongings, send it to the Nazi regime. And this is what you get from being a patriot, I would say. Yeah, it's a very sad story, actually.
Yeah.
Most of his family left Germany. They went to Palestine or to other countries like Switzerland. He unfortunately stayed there. And in the end, he died in 1939 in a Jewish hospital in Berlin. It is not really a fact that he died from the persecution by the Nazis, but I think you can say so. He had severe psychological trauma, I would say, from what has happened to his contemporary Jewish friends and to him. And I think it didn't help his mental and physical constitution. In the end, he died on the operation on a gallbladder, I think. Yeah. So yeah.
I mean, so let me just say to our audience that both Simon and I are really trying very hard to not give too much away about the book as we discuss it. But I hope that I'm not revealing too much by saying that there's palpable sense in reading this book and knowing something about him and the world that he witnessed, and that the horror that he kind of was slowly seeing unfold. I mean, written in 1930, dead by 1939. There's a real palpable sense of like watching a catastrophe unfold that would annihilate any sense of somebody's desire to see children, life itself, to place any of those precious things within this horror that's about to take place. I mean, the book, again, hopefully, hope I'm not revealing too much, but I mean, the book, it takes place after essentially a faulty red button has happened. A horrible catastrophe has befallen mankind, and that's very much the world that in a sense, very much the world that he was entering into, that the world was entering into, and whether it would be a world that it's impossible for me, who's not lived anything close to that, life and time. But I have to imagine that it felt like a world that humanity, not only might never come back from, but maybe should never come back from. I mean, it's impossible. It's entirely possible to conceptualize how that could drive somebody insane. It's a tragic story. It's a tragic ending to what was obviously a very sensitive, brilliant man, for sure. Do you think, is there any indication that there were any other antinatalist themes in any of his other works? Or was this kind of a one-off thing?
No, they were very oriented towards comedy. And he wrote a lot of it in his dialect, even in the Frankfurt dialect, which is hard to read even for me. I wouldn't say that he made a huge impact on German literature, and he was forgotten. He didn't recover from his oblivion. Which is very sad, I think. This book has been recommended to me by, as you may know, Karl Ettlinger. Shout out to Karl Ettlinger. Yeah, I even dedicated the first page to him. Yes.
There we go. There he is.
Yeah.
Dedication to Karl Ettlinger.
Yep. Which I think is one of the best recommendations I've ever gotten. You cannot say that there is a better antinatalist novel, except for one by Hannelore Valenchak, which is called The Caves, Noah's Caves. So The Caves of Noah.
I don't know this book at all.
Which is a very similar story.
Yeah.
It's a very similar story in many aspects. It's also an apocalyptic story. It's also after a huge war. And there's also an old white man telling the people not to reproduce. But it ends very differently. It has a very different style. It has different arguments. I think it's highly readable, and I would translate it, but this German is even more difficult to translate, I think. Karl Ettlinger has a very I would say simple kind of language, not too difficult to translate. Hannelore Valenchak is a different caliber, I think. Yeah.
Do you think that are there any other, novels either by Karl Ettlinger or other German antinatalists, or I don't know, maybe you speak a bunch of other languages I'm not sure about. Are there any other works that you might want to take a hand in translating?
No, it's very difficult to translate it into good English. Everybody can translate it into bad English, and there are works that are so difficult in the native language that you have to be a professional translator, basically, to really do a good job, because nobody will enjoy a bad translation, I think. I mean, it's still important to translate these books, but I think it should be done by someone who really knows his stuff. Yeah, I wouldn't want to translate another book, and I also don't know about any other books that are worth translating, actually, except for Hannelore Valenček's Noah's Caves, but this is so difficult. It has such a rich language, such a very visual language, that I don't know if I can do it any justice. It's much easier with Karl Ettlinger, I think.
There were parts of this book that did remind me of another antinatalist novel by the name of The Offset. I did interview the authors of that, Calder Shevchuk. It's pretty different, but I mean, there are little whispers of that in there. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely other antinatalist works that it reminded me of, but I mean, particularly because of the time that it came from, but also the mastery of it. I do think it kind of stands head and shoulders above other ones that I've read, for sure. Do you have any feelings on like where his anti-natalism may have come from? I mean, obviously we could say, well, Schopenhauer. I mean, and that may very well be the case. That it's just, he read Schopenhauer and he was influenced by Schopenhauer, and that's it. But he could have conceivably been familiar with Koenig, maybe even some of the other Malthusians of the time. Who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah, you don't have any insights into that. Maybe that's a question I'll have to bug Karim about.
I think his main inspiration comes from real life, not from philosophy or literature. It comes from the Third Reich, I think, and the war he has experienced as a soldier. He may have read Schopenhauer, but in his biography, there's mentioned Lessing, Goethe, Shakespeare, and a fourth one. I don't know. Fourth one, but it's not Schopenhauer, definitely not Schopenhauer. So I think he would have mentioned it if it was important to him. But the other ones were like more influential to him. He has definitely read a lot, like all people back then did.
There is some antinatalism in Goethe, so that could have very well been
definitely
the case.
in his Werther, for example, there are some lines, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think the life was his master. Life was his teacher.
I believe that 100%. That very well may be in the case. I mean, it definitely, I could definitely see that. I mean, his brother was a philosopher, so that there could have been some influence from one of his brothers, and it was apparently a fairly famous philosopher, from what if Wikipedia is to be believed. I don't know, but yeah, so maybe not. Maybe not.
The Wikipedia page is very wacky.
Okay.
They're very short. There are not many informations. But I think the book is a better place to look at Karl Ettlinger's history.
Absolutely. Well, if I may ask, has Karim read your translation, or like what has Karim kind of told you about the book, like before you even started translating it? Like what
he just recommended the book to me.
Okay.
No, he just recommended it to me. Read it. Here you go. And nice. I was mesmerized from the first page. onward.
Amazing.
And I've read it in like 2 days. I think this is one of the books that will follow me throughout my life. I think. Then there are not many books that do that can actually do that.
I will say this: I read the book in maybe about 3-4 hours. Like, it's such a breezy joy, to get through. I'd love it if you could tell me a little bit about what it was like acquiring a copy of this book. You've told me a little bit about that through email. I mean, this book had one release as far as we know, right? And then went out of print, died in obscurity, only for Kareem to come along and ignite your imagination. So what did it take to get a copy of this thing? And what was translated like?
There's indeed another translation in the Netherlands. It appeared there as well. And this was the only one, I think. In Germany, it's even harder to get. I went to the State Library of Bavaria in Munich, where I scanned the whole book. Took me about 1 hour. Then I put it on a USB stick, and then I transcribed it. This was a huge task because the software didn't detect the writing all too well. So I had to correct a lot of mistakes. Took me a couple of weeks. And then, of course, I had to translate it, which also took me about, I would say, 1.5 months, about something like that, yeah. I translated about 10 to 20 pages a day, which is manageable. I mean, you have software that can help you, so it's not that big of a deal if you compare it to times before we had software like DeepL. It would be a very different task. Yeah. So it was manageable, definitely. It was nothing like writing a book yourself. It would be a totally different thing. I don't know if I was able to catch Ettlinger's style. I think I didn't, but I'm not sure if anybody could do this because his style is simple. It's very, very readable, but it's still a bit Shakespearean.
But there is a certain kind of performative quality to his way of speaking that I liked. I mean, it kind of grew on me throughout the whole piece. But it remains natural in the it's not too strong an affect that it's sort of unnatural.
He doesn't try to show off. I think
no.
It's definitely not like other writers where the style is very convoluted, where you have sentences that go about 2 pages. I think it's one of the few works of this time that you can read, like even if you're like 15 or 14, and you can still manage it decently.
That thought did occur to me when I was reading it, that this, not that it, I know that this can sometimes be a disparaging thing to say about a work, and I don't mean it in that way in any way, shape, or form. But it could be like almost a young adult novel in a sense. It almost has that kind of fluidity and ease to it that I think is like one of its strengths. That it's so accessible to all audiences in that kind of way. Yeah.
It has some old words in it which I had to look up.
Yeah.
I didn't know them, even though I'm, basically German, you could say. I still struggled with some words and some kind of some of the sentences were very out of order. You don't say it like that anymore. It's of course an older language. an older German, but it's not like the Goethe German or any other German.
Or the Koenig
It's
German. Yeah.
it has its own style, but it's highly readable.
Absolutely. And as we were saying before we started recording, it does not get so bogged down with the philosophy aspects of itself that it comes at the expense of the story. The story really does move along quite beautifully. It's a simple story. I mean, there's not that much to it, but it doesn't, even though some pretty heavy concepts are being thrown at the reader, especially I can't even imagine what it must have been, the complete mindfuck that it must have been like for readers to read this in 1930. It doesn't put any kind of braces on the story moving forward, which I think takes a real skilled author to do. One thing I was curious about was so I know nothing about how copyright law works in Germany. It might be very different to the way that it is here. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's like 1930 on here. Everything, or before 1930, everything is in public domain. So, were you able to republish the book because the book is in public domain in Germany? Or were you able to acquire the rights?
The copyright fades after 70 years.
Okay, I see.
So I'm safe.
Good.
It's almost been 100 years since the publication of this novel. So I'm in a safe space.
Amazing.
I don't know how many people actually read this book. I don't know how many prints were available, what kind of audience was reading it. I don't even know if there are any ways of finding this out.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I meant to ask that. I mean, we have no. I mean, there's the last part of the book, which I hope is okay to bring up now. No Boogeyman. This was kind of a response. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? I mean, it does give some indication as to its reception, but not much. Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, he did this in his other work too, about the Indian who was living under colonialism in India during that time. He takes no sides. He is not pro-life, nor is he pro-antinatalism. And he really shows that in his book. The protagonist actually is an natalist, you could say, or pro-life guy, whatever, like a random guy, basically, an NPC, maybe even. And well, the antagonist, who's not a villain, that I have to say, it's a kind of a spoiler, but not really. He has the better arguments. He is the antinatalist, who actually produces what the protagonist calls the poison gas of logic, because his arguments are so good that even the hardcore natalist Dr. Young, who's the protagonist, acknowledges as invincible. He cannot really argue against them. He just has his emotions, but the reader also sympathizes with Dr. Young because he is just a very human guy. He is very humane. He is very down to earth. He is a good guy. He really wants to help people. He has a good character. He is kind. But so is the antagonist, and that's really the point. He's also not a villain. He saved humanity, at least the remnant of humanity, what has survived after the disastrous war, of the disaster war, basically. Yeah, and if he really was a villain, he could have just let the humanity go extinct. Even under his rule as a leader, he allowed people to have children at first,
and only then he put forth his commandment of not having any children, which is also interesting. Why did he not stop people from having kids in the first place? Because that would be the safer way of making sure that humanity goes extinct. But the book doesn't answer that. Well, basically, Dr. Young wakes up after a long slumber. 5,000 years have passed. He wakes up in a world that is very different from what he remembers when he fell asleep. He wakes up in a city that is very reminiscent of the Roman Empire, but the citizens actually speak his language, interestingly. Yeah, and no countries are left, no nations are left. So all what Ettlinger, what Dr. Young has known so far is a thing of the past now, and now he has to live in this country where the only commandment is not to have any children. Of course, he challenges the leader. Of course, he is someone who opposes this rule fiercely. But as the reader will see, I hope, it is not that clear cut. It is not that easy for him to go and challenge Cassius, who is the antagonist, who is the ruler of this country without any children. And in the end, the reader will have a very distinguished image of what antinatalism is about, I think. And it is a very humane approach to it. It is not radical. It is not preachy. It is not about convincing people about of some worldview. It is not a propaganda. And this is what is the essence of this novel, and what is really the high art, in my opinion. I've recommended this book to a guy from Switzerland who is also an anti-natalist, and interestingly, he told me this is the biggest natalist propaganda he has ever read. So this is basically the wet dream. This is basically the wet dream of any natalist. To which I highly disagree. It is neither an antinatalist propaganda nor is it a natalist propaganda. And this is what Karl Ettlinger really achieved. People interpret this book very differently, even though there are lines that are clearly antinatalist. But the story constructs it in such a way that the lines are woven into it, the arguments are woven into it. So the reader has to decide for himself, for herself, what the conclusion is, or if there even is a conclusion, even if there is a way of looking at the world that is the right one, whatever that may be.
It's really hard for me to like fault the book for anything, because this is a vision of an antinatalist world written before there really was fully articulated antinatalism, and yet there's so much that is recognizable as what is antinatalism today, even somewhat obscure things like the Ouroboros as an idea about antinatalism. Like there's even a line in there somewhere of like the circle is coming to a close, like the idea of the Ouroboros is like a chunk taken out of it, and that's what antinatalism is. the idea of phased extinction, the Benatarian phased extinction, which is like kind of what Cassius was doing up to a point, right? Like he was allowing some birth until he said, like, okay, this is the final generation. There's even some hints at sentient extinction and beyond. I don't want to get too much into that because I want people to find those parts for themselves. But I mean, it's in there of antinatalism not only extending to just humans but to all life. That's given its place in there somewhere. There's like, my mind is like buzzing with all kinds of stuff I want to ask you, but like one thing I wondered reading this was, do you think at all that Dr. Jung, the protagonist of the whole story, do you think that is it just coincidence, or do you think that his name was making any kind of reference to Carl Jung?
I've never thought about that. But his name that the Romans, the pseudo-Romans gave him, because everyone in his town has a name that resembles the history of the Roman Empire. And Dr. Young's name is Brutus, the son of Caesar, who is also called Cassius, right? And there are some parallels to the story of Caesar. Yeah, so Brutus is definitely a name that is not a coincidence. But Dr. Young, I'm not sure. Maybe could be.
It's actually the I mean, I didn't really consider that until I saw that people were sort of, in a sense, being reduced down to archetypes, right? Like the fact that everybody is named after Shakespearean characters or Roman characters. This has if I was raised anything, I wasn't raised religious, but I was raised Jungian, so it smells like Jungianism to me in one sense or another. So I wonder if there's some kind of symbolism being
it could be because Carl Jung wrote about the archetypes, right? This was one of his main thing.
Not only
in the shadow,
but dreams, which is like, I mean, Dr. Jung literally wakes up from a 5,000-year dream.
Yeah,
this kind of nightmare. So I don't know. There's probably no way of proving that, but I have a feeling.
Yeah, and also the idea of the shadow.
100%.
There's also something you can interpret into the story. Yeah, of course. Even Karin Vakama did write about this. You can talk about to him.
I will. I'll ask him if maybe he thinks there's any weight to that theory for sure. That would be really interesting. I mean, yeah, there's allegory and symbolism and throughout, so I don't think it would be too much of a stretch just to say that maybe some of that influence came from there. There was one reference to Moloch that I thought was so brilliant, because Moloch is sometimes seen as it's almost kind of like a yin and yang character with natalism and anti-natalism, like sometimes seen as a god of natalism, constantly feeding the machine, like in the movie Metropolis. Moloch is this like being that's like constantly desiring to be fed more workers, but rarely, but there are some examples of it. He's also used as a symbol of anti-natalism, that it's almost like feeding he's fed by the existence of the non-existent, like the number of non-existent that he's able to be to consume is sort of I just thought that was interesting. I have to also say that when Dr. Jung finds the people of this world, and this again might be like 100% off the mark, but it reminded me so much of the world that the character wakes up. I can't remember the name of the character, but the world that the people that the character in the time machine finds. He finds these people called the Eloi or the Lao, I think they're called, and they're these like kind of like overly indulged people who are like kind of on their way to it. I don't know that I can't remember if they had any antinatalism, but it was almost like these were the Eloi or the Alawi or whatever they're called if they were also very intelligent antinatalists. And I sort of wonder if there was some influence from the time machine, but there might not have. It almost has, it definitely had that feel to it. But so he ends up in this world, and Dr. Jung is written as a very vibrant kind of, there's a very, like, he's so animated, but he's quite horrified by the fact that these people are on their path towards extinction. And he has, I think, maybe one of the strengths and I think the weaknesses of the book. And I think the thing that is going to be most difficult for contemporary audiences about this book is the attitude towards women, because both sides.
I didn't know.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I didn't know if I should mention this.
No, please do.
I was hesitating, but now that you mention it, let's talk about it. Of course, yeah, he is has, of course, he's open-minded, but not towards women. Let's say that. But it's also a two-edged sword. At one point, he Dr. Jung talks about, well, I have had an arranged marriage. I was forced basically into a marriage, and I didn't love the women, and this is a disaster. It shouldn't be this way. And he writes like a line that is, man feeds her body but slaughters her soul. And this is a very, very, a very emancipatory line, basically. But on the other hand, he also says, well, the women really miss having children, right? They should really get into it, and only then they could live up to that nature. Only then they could experience what motherhood is and become a complete woman, as if you're not a complete woman without children. So this is also well, a bit of a, help me please, a bit of a, what is the word?
I'm not sure, but I mean, I think the book does
it's upsetting.
It's upsetting. There's some real misogynistic elements to the book, and there's a real inability to. I mean, it's sort of the typical thing, but it's also very topical. Look, I mean, somebody just recently, like within the last week, made a video about me, about how, like, the only reason I'm an antinatalist is because, you know, I am regretful and I'm angry at the world, and I'm taking, you know, and that's the reason why I'm making antinatalist videos. I'm taking my rage and disappointment because, like, I actually really want a child. And, like, that's kind of the attitude that he has towards women. Like, women never know what they want. You know, they're always just these kind of like mindless, poorly educated creatures that have to be led in one direction or the other, you know, by a man. But also, women are essentially why again, I'm sorry if I'm giving too much away, but I do think this is an important point that we bring up. Like, it is sort of the reason why Cassius's world fails, because he cannot defeat the indomitable desire of women to be mothers.
Brutus, he murmured, and it sounded like a groan. What I have not yet confided to anyone, I will reveal to you. Fear stretches out its tentacles toward me. Fear of an invisible enemy, against which I am not able to fight unerringly. To fend him off, I can only strike blindly around me, hoping that the accident will hit him on the head. And this enemy sits in the breast of woman. They have vowed barrenness of the body, but their soul is so filled with motherhood, as if all bodily drive for the child has been transfigured into spiritual motherhood, as if they had given birth in the soul to the child that is denied to the body. They stand in front of a blackbird's nest, breathlessly caressing the incubating female with their gaze. They abandon all joy to watch the young hatch. They feed the little peeping crybabies with a soothing devotion, as if they wanted to deny the mother blackbird's right to be the mother. Not you, we are the mothers. They cradle the newborn monkeys in their arms as if they were human babies. They babble to them all the sweet nonsense, the gibberish of love that mothers once used to tell their babies. They tickle their darlings into laughing and are overcome with delight when the baby monkey responds to their play with grimaces that only a mother can interpret as an expression of joy. They frolic with the young dogs on the marble floor, wrestle with them gently as only motherly love can. The moved devotion with which they follow the budding of a flower, the growth of a plant. What else is it but the motherly urge of the soul? They are careful not to play with dolls, for my vigilance would never tolerate this, but every drinking bowl they lift to the light becomes a doll for them. Every wreath they weave into the hair, every pillow they press their chests as they fall asleep, their body keeps a vow that their soul breaks 100 times a day. They don't know it yet, but woe betide them if their body learns to understand the language's soul. How am I supposed to defeat it? This enemy that hides in every woman's smile, in every tender hand movement, that enchants itself in a kiss this minute, that dwells between the notes of a song the next. Everywhere sensed, but never coalescing into a solid form.
Even Calpurnia, who's this modern goddess basically of infertility. All the second she has some access to those feelings, it's like, I was betrayed and my life was my path towards motherhood and glory were stolen from me. So there is this those are challenging parts of this book, and I think people will have probably take some issue with it. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I mean, Calpurnia is really a proponent of Cassius' propaganda, basically. But after his demise, you could say, she says, I cannot forgive him. He has robbed us of our youth. And I mean, is this really what she thinks, or is it more what the author is putting in her mouth? Because she had a pretty good youth without having to care for anything. In this city, you don't have to do any work, and everything is provided. She had a magnificent childhood, magnificent youth without the children. It would be completely the other way around. If she lived in times before the city, she would have to be a mother, basically. She would have to go to work, and all her youth would be washed out, thrown out of the window, basically.
It's tough though, because even saying that, it's like, well, she doesn't really know what she wants. But it's like the thing is, he did. I think this. I mean, another aspect of this book that I think is so. Mati Haira and I talk about all the time the idea of an antinatalist religion as a possible path towards the future of antinatalism. And while Cassius doesn't really create a religion, he does create a kind of cult of personality that has some relationship with a kind of religious path, way of thinking. And it's understandable that the women of that world would feel lied to, because they were not really given arguments. They were given commandments, and so they did have to make sacrifices, and they were never really able to in an honest fashion articulate a sense of loss, a sense of, what I mean? They were never able to really be antinatalists. They were compelled to be antinatalists and sort of forced by the imposition of their own culture. And so it makes sense that it failed, and it also makes sense that, I really did the whole novel I really did feel very sorry for Dr. Jung, specifically for the loss of his child and wife. You know what I mean? Like it was. I'm sorry again to like reveal so much. It's really hard not
Yeah,
to.
I mean,
But
you have to.
yeah, I mean, he wakes up into this world after having lost his wife in childbirth and then the child itself, and there is no place to put that pain. You know, and that pain is real. Like even though, oh, as antinatalists were, you know, well, he procreated, blah blah blah. It's still agony. You know what I mean? And there's no. So it's almost like what Cassius missed in his antinatalist world was making a space for that for the mourning. You know what I mean? Like if he had just made a space to allow people to mourn humanity, to mourn the piece of themselves that they were giving up. You know, it's like procreation was turned into a kind of hatred. Like we hate this about what people have done. We hate this about we hate the concept of people giving birth to people. But he neglected the fact that people do feel a sense of loss because of it. And you wonder, like, if he had been able to at least just give space to that, you know, if he'd been able to add a little psychoanalysis into the equation, you know, borrow from Dr. Jung a little bit, the real Dr. Jung, you know, maybe it would have been a more successful world. But he was, there is a certain amount of manipulation that he was acquiring his extinctionist fantasy from. And so it's kind of no wonder that it failed. Ultimately, although, right, we're not saying that because we don't know.
Well, I think that even if you give everything away, this book is still highly recommendable.
Absolutely, and there's so
it's
many
enjoyable. Yeah, it is enjoyable even if you know the outcome.
Yeah.
Even I have known the outcome because I've read what Kari Makema wrote about this in his work. So I've already known what was coming at me. But the thing is, the art of his writing and the way he really puts the story into play and the characters, it's so much fun so that you can read it again and again. It's still enjoyable.
There was one quote where I'm not going to be able to find it now, where Cassius is talking to Dr. Jung, and he sort of has his like scary Ethelist moment where he's like, you know, I'm gonna attack every blade of grass, and I'm gonna like every bug.
Yeah,
and
he's going full in Mentum. He's going full in Mentum.
It was, I mean, but I'm just saying, like, to find in a book from 1930 is pretty extraordinary. I must extend the law to everything that lives there. Even the animals shall be infertile. Every bird's nest shall be destroyed. Destroy the brood in the pond. No bee shall build any more honeycombs. No ant colony its cities. Crush every butterfly egg on the leaf. Crush every snail in the caress. You should emasculate your pets yourselves. Learn to kill animals again. You should tear the calf from the mother's udder, the puppy from the teats. In an Eden, I had wanted you to revel towards the end. But for the second time, your weakness has forfeited paradise. So die in the desert, you last of a generation ripe for extinction. Let every flower be burnt before its blossom turns into ripened fruit. Every blade of grass mowed before it gives its pollen to the wind. Oh, I want to do a thorough job. Do you know if Karl had children of his own? Was he?
I tried to find out about it, but the biography doesn't mention anything about his offspring. So I think he didn't. Let's hope so. I mean, Schopenhauer did, as you may know.
I do.
But well, I think it's not even important. Like.
No, it's not.
Really.
I was just curious more than anything else. I mean, if he did or not adds a layer of interest to the sort of like indecisiveness between antinatalism and natalism, you know, that is definitely presented in the book. Because you're absolutely, I'm sure you said it at some point. It doesn't really take a side. You know what I mean? It just sort of, it's more a, I would say that in the end, it just is a solemn kind of meditation on how difficult the life predicament, I was about to say the human predicament, but the predicament that life is in and our role in it.
There are no easy answers, and there never will be any answers. What side to take is not really a thing that you can do and say, well, I'm on the right side, which a lot of people sadly consider absolutely normal. As you see, just look in the world, people are voting for someone and say, oh, I'm absolutely on the right side, which is clearly nonsense. The world is very, very more complex, and Karl Ettlinger is doing a great job really portraying it, that nothing is easy, nothing, really nothing. No matter how good your arguments are, no matter how sophisticated your worldview is, there are always other elements than the intellect. There are always human beings are more than just calculators, more than machines. It's not about mathematics. It's also about emotions. It's about well, being in the world. Really, you cannot really stop the will to life, basically. What to say it with Schopenhauer's term, the will to life is more than just a calculated force. It's a blind force. It's a really blind, like a blind watchmaker. And the clock keeps ticking, whatever we do. Like, nothing will stop it. Nothing, really.
Until it stops us, which I think is also a point made towards the end. But
yeah,
absolutely. I did want to say, it should also be mentioned just how ahead of his time he was on other subjects within this work too, not just on the subject of procreation. I mean, the characters, again, without giving too much away, don't eat meat. There's also quite a lot in there about euthanasia. So it's kind of exceptional that he brought all of those subjects together again, in a way that really does mirror some form of contemporary antinatalism.
And it makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what he says about suicide, or what one of his characters say about suicide, is, I think it's Antonius, who says, "Don't mock the sacred, my brother. Many of us die voluntarily. How could we be happy if we didn't have the power to part painlessly at any time?" And this is a very ancient idea, I think, from Seneca, a Stoic philosopher, who said, only he who knows how to die well can live well. And it's just part of this regime that Cassius puts forward. Yeah, we live a hedonistic lifestyle, and we flourish, and we have our feasts. We just enjoy life. And the most important part in it is also to part when it's necessary, painlessly. And for this, Cassius invents a powder that turns anyone to dust in seconds. So yeah, really ahead of its time, let's say.
Incredibly ahead of its time. Incredibly ahead of its time, and incredibly enjoyable.
And it's really cool that they are all vegans, right?
Yeah, I mean, I love that part of it.
Even after Dr. Young drank too much at a feast, he asks for a herring. It's a kind of a fish that gives you like some vigilance back again, and
Antonio says, do not suggest the carcass of a herring to revive your own carcass. Yeah, so that's a really vegan idea. We shouldn't exploit other animals just to keep ourselves going.
Although, I don't know if we can call them truly vegan, because they are forcing these
Yeah.
poor little
Yeah.
monkeys, and apparently other, like, all the machines are controlled by animals, although we never really see much of that.
He doesn't go into it.
He doesn't
He's
go
not
into detail.
really detailed about technical parts, which I prefer to
Connor Garcia.
Garcia's Last Call for Heroes.
I love that
where
book.
he's
Yeah.
very detailed about the technology there.
Right.
And this is very tiring. For me, it's just tedious. It's superfluous nonsense. I can do without, basically.
For this book, it made a lot of sense not to go into detail, although it was kind of funny in a point against them that they were, like, forcing these animals to do their bidding, but also being very nice to them, being very nice.
I want to mention a point that is very rare in antinatalism. I think I haven't read anything like that. What Cassius says about children is very important, I think. He says, if children could put their thoughts into action, your most nefarious criminals could learn from them. Where is your logic, Mr. Lawyer? The child is purer than the adult, so man grows up to become worse with every breath he takes. And so the most reliable way to ennoble humanity would be to smash the skull of every 5-year-old, so that what is pure does not become impure. And this is what is pretty rare among antinatalists. They say, well, we have to protect our children for them not to become victims of this world, for them not to suffer. But here you have a very different point. I don't know if you experienced it, but I experienced the cruelty of children in kindergarten.
Oh, me? Yes.
People beat up each other in a very, very animalistic, I would say, kind of manner. They are very ruthless. They are more unscrupulous than the civilized adults. In many ways, they are very cruel towards each other. And I think what people think about children is a romanticized version of it, of the reality. Children are like wild animals, basically, and they can crush each other's skulls, which really happened. This is not something like out of a horror movie. And Cassius says a very important thing, that if children could put their thoughts into action, your most nefarious criminals could learn from them. They just don't have the means to do that. What they sometimes wish to do. Sometimes they beat their own parents. They take revenge, right? But they don't do any damage because they don't have the power. And gladly they get civilized before they become stronger, at least most of the times. So that's a very sophisticated point, I think Cassius makes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, and it's a point that Dr. Jung is definitely, it sticks in his head. I mean, that's one of the biggest pieces of what Cassius tells him, that kind of, like, maybe doesn't sway him all the way towards antinatalism, but something that he can't get out of his head. And it actually, another reason I'm glad you brought this up is because it does kind of point to a feeling that I had reading the book, that the book is kind of making more misanthropic arguments for antinatalism than it's sort of making philanthropic arguments for antinatalism. That it's like, even in the face of this horrible tragedy that's befallen the world, of, like, most of humanity dying, most of life dying out, everything being destroyed, it's not so much about saving future beings from
coming into existence. It's about one, the already existing being happy, and also the possibility of those people being bad. And so that may, in some respects, be kind of a weakness of that anti-natalism that's presented in the book, that it doesn't have enough of those maybe philanthropic arguments, but it's a very strong, it makes very strong cases for why it's bad to create people in misanthropic respects through the misanthropic, I think.
But I would also say that he isn't entirely misanthropic about the human condition, about what man is. Like there's a concept of man. Many people, like Hobbes, for example, says man is a wolf to man. So everyone is fighting against everyone. And Calpurnia, I think, says something which she again copies from Cassius. Yeah, even if 999 people consider not to kill another human being is the right thing, even they live this commandment, under this commandment, thou shalt not kill. There is the thousands, one in 1,000 who still manages to steer them up and fight each other. So people are not bad, but they are naive. So this is his point. People are not necessarily cruel towards each other, and can also be very kind, but they are they get manipulated easily, as Cassius shows, even in action. Even ironically, he demonstrates this fickleness, this indecisiveness of people. One day they cheer towards the leader, and the other day they say, "Oh, good that he's gone. Now let's have children again," right? And they are very fickle. People are fickle, and this is the point. Even if you see, I think history proves Karl Ettlinger right. Most people in Russia, I would say, do not really support the war. They are just ignorant or naive, and they get sucked into the propaganda. And then somehow, they support it indirectly. They're not bad people. They're not necessarily an evil breed or something, but
they're just easily
this
swayed.
is easily persuaded. And a last point I want to make: Karl Ettlinger is a fierce opponent of patriotism. A fierce opponent, and I don't know who said this quote, but I think it's Antonius. He says in this novel, "Your arrogance stems from a time that will never return." He talks to Dr. Young. When humanity was divided according to national borders, and the delusion was nurtured within each national border. Here you are better, more educated, more pleasing to God than over there. Every border post had the humorous task of proclaiming, this is where perfection ends and inferiority begins. And I think this is a perfect summary of any patriotism, or what people may call as patriotism. I think it's just patriotism is just a euphemisation of nationalism, nothing else. Although most people would disagree, they would say no, patriotism is just exaggerated. Nationalism is just an exaggerated form, and patriotism is good. Patriotism is fine, but you see what it leads to. As long as people believe they are on the right side, there will always be people who want to exploit that. And as you can see in the many wars that are occurring just recently in Gaza and Israel and Ukraine, in Africa, and so on and so on.
But it's also, I mean, just the time and where this was written. I mean, it's so it's all the more meaningful for the time and place that it was written in, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. It was written before the Second World War, so
yes, it was. But I mean,
should have written it. I should have read it.
It's probably not doubtful, though, that especially as a Jewish man living in that society, that he didn't feel some remnants of that brewing even then. I mean, the Nazi Party originally started in 1920, I think. I mean, they would have been not quite in full swing by 1930, but I mean, they would have been around. I mean, they would have been a known quantity. He would have definitely felt some of that. So those words have particular meaning, I think.
And later on, he was prohibited to publish. He was prohibited even to work as an author. And I'm glad he published this book before 1933. It was just a lucky strike of him. And I think one of the most luckiest one in world history.
Lucky that he wrote it, and lucky that some copies survived the war, and that you were able to find it, and that now it's available for contemporary antinatalists the world over to read in at least German and English, and hopefully in more languages to follow. Thank you so much, Simon, for making this book available to all of us. I mean, it's an absolute treasure. It's a rare and incredible gem. I just wanted to say, Simon, that just to everybody, this has been like an amazing year for antinatalist books. And I'm truly not saying that just because Matti Haira and I, had a little publication of our own, but like seriously, like tons of antinatalist books have been released this year. And, Zap's work was finally translated into English. I mean, and now we have, No Country for Children, finally. So it's just been like an incredible year for antinatalist works, new and old, to finally find their true audience, and that's a wonderful thing. Simon, thank you not only for this work. I want to first, before we close out, say that everybody should head to Amazon or anywhere else, perhaps, that they're available, I don't know, and pick up Simon's older work, The Dubious Gift of Life. It is, again, available in English and German. And definitely go and pick up copies of No Country for Children, also known as To Kill a Stork. You will not be displeased at all. It's also available on Kindle, and it's absolutely brilliant. Simon, I just wanted to thank you so much for making this work available in both languages to both audience. It's a true gift, as I've said, to the antinatal world. Are you working on anything else before I let you go? What's next for Simon?
Maybe I will write a novel myself. An antinatalist novel, of course. But let's see.
I hope so. Well, you'll have to come back on the show next time once that's all complete. Maybe some other occasions as well. We'll see. But thank you so much for everything, Simon, and thank you so much for being my guest, as always, on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast today.
Thank you, Amanda.
Hey everybody, it's Amanda. Are you looking for an excellent way of making academic antinatalist works more available across the globe? I know I am. And so I'm delighted to announce that the wonderful and award-winning Polish publishing house,
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego,
which over the last 2 years has produced some exceptionally beautiful Polish editions of both original works like
Anti-natalism
by
Mikołaj Starzyński,
as well as classic academic antinatalist works like David Benatar's Better Never to Have Been, has now opened an online shop featuring the magnificent antinatalist Ouroboros designed by
Michał Dziadkowiec.
The logo is fully customizable and available on a wide variety of products. Proceeds from all sales at the shop go directly towards the translation, production, and publication of more Polish editions by
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego.
What a perfect way for the antinatalist community to help assist an amazing company doing such important work, making more antinatalist academic works more widely available. Link below.
Towarzystwo Naukowe imienia Stanisława Andreskiego.
Thank you for listening to the Exploring Antinatalism Podcast. Please follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Exploring Antinatalism can also be heard on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Buzzsprout, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Amazon.com, and so many other platforms. You can email me at exploringantinatalism@gmail.com. Website designed by Visions Noirs. Please follow him at www.bionoir.com and follow him on Instagram. Logo art by Life Sucks. Please subscribe to him on YouTube and check out his shop on Etsy at www.etsy.com/shop/LifeSucksPublishing. Music by Mati Hairi. You can hear the whole song, Life is a Sexually Transmitted Disease with a Mortality Rate of 100%, by following the link in the description. And make sure to also read his academic paper which inspired the song, If You Must Give Them a Gift, Then Give Them the Gift of Non-Existence, in the Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics on cambridge.org. Links below. All the best, and bye for now.
Life is no thrill compared to nil. Life is no thrill, it's worse than nil. So draw the right conclusion, let them be still.